Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of 1 Corinthians. We are continuing today to look at chapter 14, where Paul gives us more instructions about spiritual gifts, specifically instructions about tongues and prophecy. Now, we saw yesterday Paul places greater value on prophecy in public worship because it benefits the entire congregation. The whole church is equipped through prophecy, where tongues may just benefit the one speaking in tongues. He goes a little further with that as he looks to the order of worship. In verses 26 and following, Paul gives some specific instructions on how to order your worship services, especially around tongues and prophecy. What then shall we say, brothers and sisters? When you come together, each of you has a hymn or a word of instruction or a revelation or a tongue or an interpretation. In other words, when you gather, many of you have something to offer. Some of you have some instruction. That's the gift of teaching. Some of you have revelation. That's a prophecy. Some of you have a tongue. You're speaking in tongues. Some of you have an interpretation. So you're using your gifts in the worship of the church, which is very good. But everything, Paul says, must be done so that the church may be built up. In other words, as the gifts function in the church, have an order to your worship so that everyone can be edified and built up. So if anyone speaks in a tongue, 2 or at the most 3 should speak, one at a time, and someone must interpret. If there is no interpreter, the speaker should keep quiet and thus speak to himself and to God. So he says, have order about it. No more than 2 or 3 in one service. You don't want the service to go too long or be too encumbered with too many trying to speak all at once. So if some have tongues, just 2 or 3, one at a time, so everyone can pay attention. And there must be someone with the gift of interpreting. So if there's no one to interpret, I say let the one speaking in tongues speak quietly to himself and to God. He will be benefited. It will be a prayer language. But since you're in a public church gathering, don't speak out loud in tongues unless there's an interpreter, because everyone will not benefit from it. He goes on to say about prophets. Now 2 or 3 prophets should speak, and the others should weigh carefully what is said. And if a revelation comes to someone who is sitting down, the first speaker should stop. In other words, you're not all speaking at once, but if you have 2 or 3 with a word of prophecy, let them, one at a time, share what God is speaking to their heart, share it with the church, and that gives the church time to listen, to weigh it, and to benefit from it. For you can all prophesy in turn, so that everyone may be instructed and everyone may be encouraged. The spirits of prophets are subject to the control of prophets. For our God is not a God of disorder, but a God of peace, as all the congregations of the Lord's people know. So Paul gives an order of worship, not to restrict the flow of the Spirit or to hamper the work of God, but the structure enables everyone to benefit from the Holy Spirit's move in the congregation. So those who are gifted are allowed to minister in the church in the ways in which their gifts flow, but it's structured and ordered so that everyone can benefit the maximum amount. So prophets speak one at a time. They don't speak over each other, don't speak at the same time, one at a time, and everyone carefully listens and carefully weighs what they have said, and thus benefits by the word of the Lord. When someone wants to speak in tongues, that's permitted, as long as there is an interpreter. And so again, one at a time, and when the interpretation is given, everyone can weigh what is said and benefit from the Lord's instruction. However, if there is no interpreter, they are not to speak. So you see that Paul believed there should be a structure to the order of the church so that everyone could benefit. So you have the spontaneity and flow of the Holy Spirit that must be in the church, but also you have order and structure that all may benefit to the maximum amount possible. Tomorrow when we continue, we'll look some more at what Paul says about tongues and prophecy. So I hope you join us for our 5-minute Bible study in the book of 1 Corinthians.